So, the Race to World First in WoW has been going on for about 16 days as of this recording, and I have to say, I really love seeing some of the best players in the world coming up with these awesome strategies and executing on them flawlessly in an attempt to be the quickest to clear the raid. It's very engaging. But, as a race, I do think there are some flaws that really detract from the enjoyment as a viewer. Not only that, but these flaws also put a huge barrier to entry for any guild that might want to participate. Now, I have done a video in the past where I made a comparison between the race in Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft, and in that video I talked about some of these flaws. If you would like to watch that, I'll have it linked in the description below and suggested in the video above. A TLDW for that video, I find some of the ways Blizzard handles raiding to really kind of suck. One of those is no global release. The USA always gets the patch first, followed by the EU, and then other regions after that. I find that to be pretty crappy, and it raises questions that wouldn't be raised otherwise. I also didn't like that Blizzard would completely overtune end-of-the-tier raid encounters to really challenge the world-first raiders, and then, throughout a tier, they just nerf them down to what they probably should have been in the first place. But, in doing so, it also robs all the other raiding guilds from ever being able to try these fights the way that they were initially released. Now, a topic that I didn't go over that I really should have, and this one seems to be getting worse, are split runs and the obscene amounts of gold needed to be competitive. So let me start off by defining split runs. Basically, split runs are dividing a raid team into different armor classes, such as all plate, and by doing this, the guild takes advantage of how loot is distributed. And this is because the way WoW designed its loot system for raiding, it kind of sucks. Instead of a boss dropping loot that can be logically distributed to raid members, what Blizzard did is make it so that a few random players will get a piece of loot that is good for their armor class. Since the loot can be traded, the team can target whomever they want to get the gear for. Which means, if you want to seriously participate in the race, you are going to need an army of alts, so that you can do many split runs. Otherwise, the guild will have a serious item level disadvantage, and that extra DPS, survivability, and healing can really make the difference between being first and second. Now, would you believe me if I said that this gets worse? Well, unfortunately, it does. Because nowadays, these world-first guilds will invite players outside of their raiding roster to join in on their split runs. Usually, followers from their Twitch streams or social media. And, if those invited players just happen to get a drop, the guild will pay them gold to trade for it. An unreal amount of gold. And here is an example of how much gold is on offer. 10 million gold for a normal tier token from the Dreadlords and Rigelin. 4 million gold for any other heroic tier token. 2 million gold for the normal tier token from Hallandris, Lehavin, and Anduin. Now, why would they spend this kind of gold on these tier tokens? Well, because tier tokens are used to trade for sets of gear with very powerful bonuses. And basically, if you want to be competitive in the race, you are going to want to get 4 of these pieces to enable the very powerful 4-piece set bonus. It's a complete game changer, and if you want to be competitive, you will need them. And of course, these guilds will also have to repeat this for every single one of their alts. That is costing not just a ton of gold, but also time. Now, the amount of gold being spent for raiding has reached an absurd level. There was an article on Wowhead where Limit, one of the world-first raiding guilds, said that they spent 331 million gold for the first tier of raiding in Shadowlands. That is an astronomical amount of gold. To put that in perspective and how much you need to spend on WoW tokens, that would be around 55,000 US dollars for a single raid tier. Or put another way, you could buy around 2,750 WoW tokens for that kind of gold, which equates to about 226 years of sub time. And if you think it got cheaper for the next tier, well, it did not. Echo spent 478.5 million gold for the second tier of raiding. The numbers just keep on increasing. How does this benefit the race in a positive way? I don't think it does. I think that it creates a huge barrier to entry that keeps out many guilds who may have wanted to participate, but they can't. Because really, how many guilds do you think have access to hundreds of millions of gold? And I also can't imagine that World First raiding teams enjoy this either. Having to make these obscene amounts of gold, that sounds miserable. How many boosts and carries do these teams need to do in order to procure that kind of gold? I can't even imagine. Not to mention, all that time spent maintaining alts and running all those split runs sounds equally miserable. So, this filter exists between the World First raiding guilds and everyone else, and skill isn't what is filtering the guilds here. It's how much gold can you make. It's how big of a following do you have on social media. How many people are going to loan you gold, help you get gear? Are you sponsored? Can you afford to spend all this time doing these activities that really have nothing to do with how fast your team can come up with a strategy and execute on it? So, what can be done? I think there are some obvious changes that would help make the race better, such as a global release, but for whatever reason, Blizzard doesn't want to do that. The things Blizzard have done only doubled and tripled the amount of stuff that the World First raiding guild would have to do. Here's a good example. In Wrath of the Lich King, during the Icecrown Citadel raid, the Endwing bosses had limited attempts attached to them. This was done to try to limit the amount of raiding each week. How, oh how, I wonder, did guilds combat this? Well, they made sure to have an alt raid ready to double the amount of attempts. The effort by Blizzard to lessen the amount of raiding each week, well, it backfired, to say the least. The big problem is gear, and the way it is acquired. That is where so much time, gold, and energy is going. I think a good solution would be to open up the heroic raids to have no weekly loot reset, make them completely farmable. Also, get rid of the random loot to random player nonsense. There is no need for that amount of RNG and loot. I get that it could suck when a raid leader would abuse master loot, but is this alternative really better? And to add on to the previous statement, make all the loot treasure coffers, like a helmet coffer that would match the armor class of the player who opened it. That would make gearing a raid so much less annoying, since this would easily be tradable to whoever might need that specific piece. Now, if you looked at all these statements and thought, well, that sounds very much like how Final Fantasy XIV handles its loot, well, you'd be right. And it works so well there that I don't see why it couldn't work in World of Warcraft. Now, I actually don't believe Blizzard would do this, because I think they like gear being a huge time sink with lots of RNG. You know, to keep the people playing. What does Blizzard care? All that matters to them is if players are engaging with the systems. Now, I know that a lot of this just appears to be bad for a very tiny percentage of raiders, but I do believe that some of these design choices, they trickle down and affect everyone. Is gear being this RNG dependent good or fun for anyone? Are bosses being severely overtuned and balance being left on the cutting room floor? Is that really a good thing? Why not have patches released simultaneously so everyone can start the raid together? Anyways, that is all for today. I do wonder, what do you guys think would help with the race? And maybe even make raiding in general better? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you are all having a great day. And if you liked what you saw, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. Thanks again, take care.